Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hello, Renegade Thinkers. Let's say you're the CMO of a well-known, make that really well-known organization, and you've been working on a brand refresh for, let's say, a year or so, one that would help propel your brand forward for, let's say, another 100 years. And then COVID-19 strikes, overwhelming health systems, disrupting economies, and dominating the conversation around the world. So what do? Do you put the rebrand on hold? I have to say most would, and in fact, many have, but not the American Lung Association for reasons that will become clear after you hear from Julia Fitzgerald, their CMO. What's amazing to me about this story is that it demonstrates unusual strategic agility, the ability to stay committed to your purpose while adjusting to rapidly changing circumstances. And with that, Julia, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Drew.
And so for the guests, I know where you are, but where are you right now? And maybe you could sort of share how COVID-19 and the pandemic has impacted you and your family.
Sure. Well, physically, I'm in Chicago. And even more specifically, I am now in my home office, as is just about everybody in the suburbs of Chicago. But still working miraculously side by side with all my colleagues.
There you go. And so how has your organization had to, how smooth has it been getting through the sort of work from home challenges?
Well, I would say we're probably on par with most organizations. We already had some infrastructure that was decentralized. So for some of our colleagues, it was an easy pivot. But then there's that whole notion that we're all going someplace different. And we moved through that pretty smoothly. I would say the real challenge is, being the American Lung Association, and since COVID-19 is a lung disease, it's basically a respiratory virus. Our whole content, our whole focus switched overnight. And keeping pace with that running train was 3, 4, 5 times the challenge of our physical relocation.
Yeah, and to have those two things happen at the same time, it's not only did you have to we're dealing with this, but physically moving everybody and sort of building a new structure or infrastructure. You are right in the middle of the story and of all sorts of things. But before we dive into that, and we will. Before you jumped to American Lung Association, you worked mainly for, I think, exclusively for profit brands. I noticed Hallmark, Sears, Sylvan Learning, among others. What made you make the jump to the nonprofit world? And probably more importantly, what new skills did you have to learn to navigate between the differences between for-profit and not-for-profit?
Well, I really came to a point in my career where I wanted to do something that made a difference. I wanted to do something that was important to me personally, and I felt like the years of skills that I had accumulated would go towards a greater good. So I started really kind of looking around for something that connected with me, and because I have personal connections to lung health and lost my own dad to lung cancer, this really spoke to me. And when I heard about the opportunity, I went about stalking our CEO until I could convince him that the only logical thing he could do was to bring me on.
There you go. Yes, indeed. Commitment and relentless follow through to get it. And I think it is amazing. And I've talked to a number of CMOs who have been in the nonprofit space, and many of them made after couple decades doing it in the profit. But I know that there are some differences, and there's some things that you've sort of needed to probably learn or relearn because it's just the way decisions are made. I've often heard of it's very hard sometimes in a nonprofit to get a decision because of the need for consensus and things like that. What have you felt any new challenges? And again, I'm thinking pre-pandemic.
Yes. I would say it was a give and take. They probably had challenges dealing with me. I had challenges dealing with them. But the fortunate piece is one of the core infrastructure needs for American Lung Association is identical to really any big organization. And that is the ability to communicate digitally and the ability to have a strong and meaningful brand. And those happen to be things that I've had years of experience building. So I had something to offer that they needed, which gave them the patience and grace to wait for me to catch up to their way of thinking and processing. I had been really working in private equity organizations prior to coming to American Lung Association. And there, it's generally a really tight time frame. You're thinking in spans of 3 years, and things have to happen. But for organizations like the American Lung Association, I mean, they've been around for 115 years, and we're in for the long game. So I really had to change my mindset about what we're trying to do. I also had to learn a lot of new vocabulary, things like database, they refer to as a house file. So we've had any number of very funny conversations where I think they're saying one thing and they're really saying something else. And again, it takes a little bit of humor and grace to stop and laugh at each other and say, I got you.
Yeah. And it's interesting that when you think about nonprofits and your ability to say we're thinking long term, and it's true when I talk to CMOs at private equity companies and VCs, it's very much about in the quarter. I mean, what'd you do to drive pipeline? It is an opportunity to think about it. Here's the irony. In the last 4 weeks, it has been anything but long-term planning. It's been absolutely the opposite of that. And in our prep call, it occurred to me that many of the things that you've been able to do during the pandemic would be inspiring to the listeners. And rather than leave that to the end, as we did in our first call, I thought it'd be good to you've managed to do so many things and adjust the organization because you are right in the middle of the conversation. And I thought, for example, your weekly sessions with your chief medical officer as an example of something that you I'll call it a new product that you rushed to market. Could you talk about that? And then we'll get to some of the other things that you've been doing.
Sure. So the first thing to do is to try to understand in the moment what our constituency needs from us. And it's information. They need trusted information that's easily accessible. So one of the things that we were able to do is to take our chief medical officer and set him up every Monday to do a webinar. And this was first really promoted and talked about to our patients. So our patient base, people who have COPD, asthma, any type of lung disease. But word quickly got out, and these are very heavily attended webinars. We also found medical spokespeople who are in our network, and we had them do Ask the Expert sessions with our online support groups, and also very well attended. We were able to go out and talk to all of our medical spokespeople. They are writing all of these very on-point, insightful blogs. And these products just really were able to materialize in no time at all.
And it's interesting. When you describe it, and again, different language, if you're a product manager right now or a CMO at a software company, I mean, the idea of an AMA, Ask Me Anything, is something that you had in your kit, but you wouldn't necessarily thought of right now. But one of the things that we're noticing is, that we're getting to the point for business brands where webinars are already, reaching. There's a point where we're going to get to burnout. But if you have and this is, again, a chief medical officer, someone with real authority and real knowledge who's going to be available every single week to be able to answer questions and offer, especially as things are changing as quickly as they are. It speaks to importance of quality and the individual who's doing it, like a CEO at a private company doing a webinar right now, again, in the context of the moment, right? I mean, if they were just talking about anything, but you are right on the front lines. So I'm curious, another thing you mentioned, so you mentioned influencers. You also shared this idea of virtual advocacy days. And I was thinking about that, and that really is, so a lot of companies are struggling with how do they do face-to-face meetings? And you had something that used to be a face-to-face meeting. Can you talk about that?
Sure. This is actually the cornerstone of our lung cancer efforts, and it's with our Lung Force Heroes, and they are our lung cancer survivors. We always bring one from every state across the country, and we, on Advocacy Day, convene in Washington, D.C., and we march to the Capitol Hill, and we have all of these great meetings set up where they advocate for more health care and for adequate funding for NIH. It's a very moving day. And we hated like heck to cancel it, but you can't take people who have these immune issues, put them on an airplane and move them to DC. So it was even before everything was on lockdown. So the combined team was very innovative on how to set this up as a virtual day. All of our heroes were still connected virtually. We also kept all of the appointments. Every one of our congressmen, every one of our senators still took their appointments via telephone, and it was a great and very empowering success. But it started to paint for us the way of the future, like for however long. We need to find ways to have virtual events. So when you think about taking your event innovation, we sort of had to put it on overdrive.
All right, we're going to take a break, and there's lots more to talk about, so stay with us. Hey, it's Drew, and I wanted to have a quick conversation about turning lemons into lemonade. Here are the lemons: skiing, Park City, January 11th, third day, last run, going fast. Light was bad, a lot of snow on the ground, 50 yards from the bottom, I crashed and burned. Literally tumbling down the mountain, did a 3-point landing with my head and 2 thumbs. Broke the right thumb, sprained the left thumb, finished up surgery 5 days later, and now I have a little extra time on my hands. What do? I finish a special report that I've been dying to finish for a long time, which is a way for me to get to my next book. It's a preview of the book. You can find it on renegade.com. On the very beginning of the homepage at the top, there's a banner that says B2B Special Report. I would love it if you took a look at this and let me know what you thought. I think you're going to find a lot of value in it. Okay, we're back. So events are really a big part of a lot of marketers' playbook. They're looking now at 2020 as a lost cause. It used to generate lots of leads, which generated income. Well, in the nonprofit world, I know that events are important, particularly galas. And you were starting to talk about some of the things that you have done to turn your physical events into galas, virtual events. Maybe you can speak to those.
Absolutely. So this time of year is really important to us for one of our signature events, which is called the Climb. So across the country, we have a lot of climbs where people gather and they raise money and they climb up skyscrapers. So of course, we can't really do that, but we have been really innovative in getting ideas how to do this from all corners of the organization. Everyone brings like, hey, I've seen this, I've seen that. So we have figured out how to do a virtual climb. So we have about 8 of them that we're getting ready to deploy. We have a trek across Maine, so a bike ride that we're figuring out how to do in a virtual way. Will it work? We don't know. We will find out, but people are pretty forgiving. Even like we just saw ourselves, sometimes Zoom drops you, sometimes things happen, but you have to start someplace with your innovation and give it a shot.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that I love the idea of a virtual climb. I'm curious in exactly how that will play out. And that's certainly a way of keeping the folks thinking about things differently. I'm curious, as you do that, are you also thinking, okay, this isn't going to work as well, so we're going to need to make some adjustments?
Definitely. And we're also looking at what else can we do for different types of fundraisers, because we know for certain what's going to happen this year. We're going to lose a certain number of events. What we can't see is what's going to happen for not-for-profits in the foreseeable future, the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Will we come together for events? Will the economic downturn really kind of dampen people's philanthropic spirit? There's just a lot of variables where we wish we had crystal balls. So we're trying things that we didn't really kind of have going on before. We're much more aggressive with Facebook fundraisers, with peer-to-peer fundraising. One of our Lung Force heroes and actress, Chantel Van Santen, actually started a virtual climb, doing mountain climbers on Instagram and doing a full-on challenge. So there's a lot of things that we're trying that are on a very accessible level. But we also made a really big announcement last week, and that is that we are putting forward something that we call the COVID-19 Action Initiative. And in the face of all of this uncertainty, we are certain that we need to step up. So we are committing $25 million to the COVID Action Initiative for both research, education, advocacy, and to convene leaders, both public health and private industry, to commit to preparedness in the face of future respiratory viral infections. So not only are we saying we're going to figure this out, we're going to double down because this is very important to public health.
And it's interesting. First of all, kudos to you for the ambition of this kind of program. Where is the money for this going to come from?
Well, the first piece of it, which is about $8 million, is coming from our reserves and from core money that we have that we can invest. So we have that to start with, and we are going to be very aggressively and enthusiastically fundraising to find the balance. And to do that, we're looking at a couple of different ways to go about it, but we're also turning to our corporate partners. We're looking to new corporate partners. We're looking to public health. We're looking to foundations. So we're also looking to individuals, right, who are very motivated by getting ahead of this pandemic and the next pandemic.
And what it seems to me, it takes a lot of courage in the middle of an economic crisis and a health crisis to make a big commitment like that. Where'd that come from?
Well, a lot of it comes from our CEO, Harold Wimmer. He is a man who makes no small plans. And he also takes very seriously the responsibility of the American Lung Association. And we're very like-minded with Harold. When he tells us, this is not a time to be afraid. This is a time to start thinking and figuring out what is our role in this? How do we help? We all shoulder up to do it.
And it's amazing. And that's what leadership is about, is recognizing opportunities when in the middle of craziness and saying, we have a role to play. We're part of the solution, not just today, but tomorrow. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you right now, because we're in the middle of this thing. And I think it would be helpful for, before we talk about the rebranding, which we are going to do, to just talk a little bit about the history of the American Lung Association. As we discussed, people know about it. They may not know a lot about it, but talk a little bit about some of the critical things that the American Lung Association has done in its 115 years?
115 years, yes.
Wow.
Well, we were founded to eradicate tuberculosis. So these are familiar grounds to us. Tuberculosis was the lung disease of the day. And actually, back then, the American Lung Association founded the whole principle of tackling a public health issue by combining research, education, and advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
So we pioneered that model that has now been adopted by many public health organizations. But we also know that if you're in this for the long haul, that these infections, these lung diseases can be beaten. So we come to this with a big sense of optimism, and we know how to see this through. Over the years, though, after tuberculosis was largely kept under control, the Lung Association also did other huge things. Most of the smoke-free laws are because of our participation. The reason people don't smoke on airplanes anymore, thank the American Lung Association. We've helped millions of people stop smoking. We have advocated for the Clean Air Act. In fact, the guy who runs our advocacy division, his dad wrote the Clean Air Act. So we're huge proponents there. We are also really involved and have been able to increase the number of people who get scanned for lung cancer. So the things that the American Lung Association has been able to do over the last 100 years, I could fill a page.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that public health nonprofits see research, education, and advocacy. I've been on the board of the Urban Green Council here in New York, which is dedicated to sustainable green building, not just in New York, but around the world. And I would say that education, advocacy, and research are the cornerstones of that organization. And I think it really helps that you know that you can take advantage of it. But I know that there's a brand story here too. So let's take a break and we'll come right back. I'm back. I'm not going to talk about skiing, but I do want to talk about the special report that you will find on renegade.com. There is so much meat in this, in the 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy in 2020, that there are probably some folks out there that think I'm crazy to put that out there in front of a firewall. But I'm really hoping to get feedback from some of you all on the report, perhaps what's missing, because again, the book is going to be developed against this outline, but fleshing it out. There might be some guests that could help fill in some of the areas. You may disagree with some of the things. I'm really interested in your opinion on this piece, and your engagement with it will really help make the book that much stronger. So you'll find it on renegade.com. Very top, there's a banner that says 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy. Take a look. Okay, we're back. And part of the story here is that the American Lung Association actually rebranded and announced this rebranding right in the middle of the COVID crisis. I mean, it's just astounding. I mean, I can just think about you a year ago. Oh, we've got this nice plan. We're this company. We're around. We've been around for a long time. We're going to just work our way through it systematically. But So I'm curious, you got to the point where you were ready to go, and
Mm-hmm.
then this hit. Was there a moment where you said, we shouldn't do this?
Well, there was a moment where we seriously took stock and said, what is at risk? What's at risk if we put it on pause, and what's the risk if we go ahead? And one thing I'd have to say about the rebranding is that the rebrand is done in service to the mission. We are really not trying to take a headline with our rebranding. We're trying to present ourselves as a reliable, trusted champion for the next 100 years. When it started becoming obvious that the coronavirus crisis and our brand launch were on a collision course, the thought was, well, do we go ahead with our old brand and present ourselves to not just thousands, but really millions of new people, new constituents, new citizens in our old dress? Or do we put on who we plan to be for the next 100 years and greet them as such? So we decided to go ahead and present ourselves in the new best light. Now, there's some practical sides to this too. Part of the new rebranding involved a new website. So the website actually makes it easier for people to come and find us, to get information, to, decide to donate, to decide to, find the best resources for themselves. This was all in the wings, all the new branding. So it became a multi-layered decision. But when you get right to it, you have to think what's going to be best for the constituent and what's going to propel us into the next 100 years. And that made the decision easier.
And so I get some of it, and in that, I get the new dress, and I think we talked about moving from the red mark to the blue mark, and that makes a lot of sense just in general, because red is sort of occupied by it's a much harsher color, and this is a very positive organization. A new website is a really tricky thing because there's always a risk that your search traffic will drop. And here you are in the moment where you are at the center of this, because as you said, this is a lung disease primarily. And so how did you make sure? I mean, that's a tactical thing, but was that at all a part of the conversation?
It was part of the conversation. And for all of those CMOs who are out there and they've been part of a big new website relaunch, you're usually hunkered down in a big room with all your colleagues and your IT buds. And it's kind of this great, like, all right, we're live, here we're going. And then you watch the SEO to make sure, and your traffic to make sure you're not dropping.
Right.
So instead of that big moment, we're all in our bedrooms with our office set up and across, all these different sites.
Sure.
So, it really, I think, exacerbated that sense of, oh, please let it work. Oh, please let it work.
Right.
But the due diligence had been done prior to pulling the trigger. And we have just a great team of folks around this. And it did work, fortunately. And the CMO's worst nightmare, that you make this investment and then you start to see organic traffic drop like a rock, is not what happened. In fact, quite the opposite. So that part was a win. And, our board was with us, our whole team, everyone kind of knew it was at risk. It was a well-vetted decision, and people were really happy with where we've turned out.
So all of that is good. I want to talk about just some of the components of you've called it a brand refresh, and I've already mentioned the logo, but let's talk about the logo for a second, because I know what that logo was, being a history buff, and how you've sort of given it new meaning.
Well, yeah, I'll roll back a little bit. Like, why did we embark on this brand refresh in the first place? The American Lung Association had not touched its brand in 100 years. This is the 100th anniversary of our mark. And, it's associated with a lot of good work, the association is. But when we did our due diligence, we found that people didn't really necessarily understand what that mark was. They either didn't associate the mark with the organization, and even those who should know what it is didn't understand the meaning. Now, about 100 years ago, when American Lung Association decided to eradicate tuberculosis, they adopted this double-barred red cross from the Crusades as a symbol of a crusade against tuberculosis. Now, go figure, iconography that supports crusades is not as popular today as it used to be.
Yes, true.
But even more germane is that we didn't, even as an organization, we didn't imbue that emblem with any meaning. So now when we did our refresh, our mark now has some symbolism to us. The first bar in the cross stands for education, the second for advocacy, and it is held together with the research. So even as we show our brand, every time we look at it, it reminds us of what is core to us.
Education, advocacy, and research. See, and I can remember that. And that's one of the things, the rule of threes is good. I also want to just sort of see, I told you, listeners, that we would get here. But one of the things when we talk about marks is, do you need one or not? If you do think you need one, make sure it means something. And if it doesn't, give it meaning as Julia did here. Now I interrupted you, so please continue.
No, one of the challenges for me and any CMO that has a heritage brand is being able to bring the past to the point where you can pivot and bring up new constituents in the future. So when we were looking at the brand and how it's visually represented, there's a line. I mean, you have to be able to keep it recognizable so that, you know, if someone who's been contributing to you for 40 years gets a direct mail piece, you want them to say, oh yeah, this is the same organization. Look, this is new and refreshed.
Right.
So that is actually one of the very big parameters. But I also want to go back to the why. You know, you only change your brand if you know that you need to make a pivot for the future. And we've already discussed all of the great things that the American Lung Association had been able to pull off in its history. But if everyone just kind of thinks about what is happening with lung health, and you're like, I don't think about lung health, give it a second. Sure you do. In the last year, the youth vaping epidemic, huge. This did not used to be a concern. Now it is an epidemic as defined by the Surgeon General. Climate change and the effect of climate change on health, that is a huge impact that we need to address. And now COVID-19, we have a whole new set of lung health challenges and a whole new set of people that we need to be able to reach out to. So it's very important that we sound, look, and appear as a trusted resource and a trusted champion.
So you've used the term trusted champion, and I know that's code for an archetype. And since we don't talk about archetypes much on the show, but I think about them. These are 12 Jungian archetypes that you can go online and search archetype test, and you can go in and answer the questions and come up with the archetype for your brand. I had two questions for you. When you went through the archetype exercise, was this about who you were or who you wanted to be? And that's a very tricky balance. And then secondly, there is no trusted champion as an archetype in the Jungian model. So let's talk about that. Where'd you start?
Oh, you smarty pants. You blew my cover. But you're right, there is none. But I'm going to start with your first question, which is it who we are, who we want to be? A little bit of both. We went through a really disciplined, very data-oriented process. And then we started looking at the archetypes and what did the data from our internal sources tell us? And what did the data from external sources tell us? And when we did all of the audits of how we show up, how do we sound, digitally, any place that we show up, how do we sound? You really have to pull all of this together and analyze it. And it became pretty clear that we're all very dedicated to our mission. We are very optimistic. We're trustworthy. We're reliable. We do what we say we want to do. And that really would point to an archetype that's called the innocent.
Yes, let me pause for a moment. It's so funny because if you are on the agency side and you get there, there's this moment where I can't tell the client, I'm not going to walk into the CEO's office and say they're an innocent. They're not going to like it. We've got to, and even though Disney and Dove are two brands that fall into that archetype, and there are a lot of brands that would feel really good about being a Disney or a Dove, it's a tricky one. So the point simply is you don't have to use the name. You got to trusted champion. And that's a little bit different than the innocent archetype. You sort of blended some other things in there too to make it your own, right?
Well, we had a lot of elements of the hero archetype. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, everyone thinks going into this, we want to be the hero archetype. When you're true to the data and when you're true to who you really are as an organization, not everyone shows up as the hero. We are truly the innocent. And but that's not a motivating term.
No, it isn't.
And most of the organization is not marketing. So what I try to do is market the marketing and take some of the terms that come out of the innocent archetype and bubble those to the top.
Right.
And we, by the way, it wasn't just my marketing team doing this. We had a cross-functional team that included board members as well. So we had a nice, sized group, and we vetted these conversations. And once we got to Trusted Champion, those light bulb moments where everyone's head starts nodding and everyone sits up a little bit taller in their chair, like, that is us. That's it.
Yay.
And that's who we are with Trusted Champion. And, your kind of sausage making conversation and terms aren't always supposed to show up in your public facing communications. But Trusted Champion actually works both internally and externally for us. So this is one of these terms that really works for our organization and sums up who we try to be in the conversation.
And so one of the things you couldn't do that you might have and I think you used the term, it's like confetti and bells and whistles, and you had to sort of jump ahead in the plan. Talk a little bit about, okay, so you've changed the website, you've changed the logo, you have this new Trusted Champion sort of descriptor. What did you do other than a press release that it sort of took advantage of this new brand, or how did it inform the activities that you've done in the last several weeks?
Sure. Well, we had a pretty robust communications plan, starting with internal stakeholders that we were rolling out really from January 1st on. So by the time we got to the end of February, that's when we had to make the big decisions. And what we decided to do is take the opportunity to talk about the brand and invert it. So really what would have been the headline of American Lung Association refreshes brand after 100 years,
right?
Confetti. That became paragraph 3. Mm. The headline and paragraphs 1 through 2 are all about American Lung Association focuses on COVID-19. Here's what you need to know.
Right.
And really at the bottom, it became, as you find these resources on our website, you may notice we have a new look. Here's why. So 10 months of like sweating every detail came down to, we have a new look, and here's why.
It's interesting, and I have to say that this is part, because I earlier today had a huddle with 10 CMOs from a wide range of industries, and one of the conclusions that came out of this particular call was that right now is not the moment to be selling or talking about brand. Right now is the moment to be as helpful as you can be in the context of who you are. And the irony to me is, we used to talk about this at Renegade in terms of marketing as service. Do marketing that is of value, of inherent value. And then the rest will come. And so it's like sell by not selling, educate by, bring people into your brand by doing something for them. And I feel like in some ways, this may have been the best thing. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but that your decision to jump to how you're helping and creating all those programs made the new promise that much more real.
Well, when we were looking at a brand refresh, what became clear to us that 75% of your brand is not the color, it's not the logo, it's not the font, it's how everyone behaves. And it's having that same interaction with American Lung Association in Seattle as you would have in Orlando, in our Chicago headquarters, in our DC advocacy office. So much about our brand journey throughout that year was deciding how we show up as this trusted champion. A little back note to that, the organization had a big shift. Maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, they were 8 chapters and one kind of a national umbrella. And they changed. to be one organization.
Right.
So part of my motivation as a CMO was also to use this as the clarion call for all of us to show up together in the same way. And it's been a huge internal unifier and motivator. So, it has an external long game purpose, but for right now, it has also helped us speak about COVID-19 in the same vocabulary, with the same enthusiasm, with the same sense of purpose.
I haven't been able to mention Ben Franklin in a show for a while, and he is my hero. And believe it or not, there's a natural segue here. You talk about how everyone, how the brand shows up. And the way I look at it is Franklin said, well done is better than well said. And as we think about brands, we think about the actions that the brands can do that make whatever promise that you, and particularly if you have such a clear purpose. One of the things I love talking to nonprofit organizations that have gone through this process is there's a clarity of purpose that for-profit brands could so benefit from. Because every day that you're coming to work to help fight lung cancer, to help fight lung disease. And that's such a powerful, clear, and simple purpose, right? But I think, and I've seen it, and this is the moment where brands that have a very clear purpose are finding their North Star. It's a lot easier to make decisions. And even if they are in tough financial situations, it's guiding them to make informed and better decisions. So it's a wonderful thing what you've all been able to do. I'm quite curious as we wrap up this show from the refresh exercise that you've gone through, what would you say have been the biggest lessons? I mean, this has been obviously an unusual brand refresh in terms of the way it rolled out. But what has been the biggest lessons for you?
Well, operationally, and this relates back to going from a for-profit world to a not-for-profit world, creating an internal committee to do a brand refresh together, huge. I don't think I don't think the brand would have been such a unifier if we hadn't taken that careful step. So understanding the role of kind of organizational behavior, it was new to me, and that was a huge learning. When it comes down to like pivoting, and really kind of meshing the trade-offs between, we had planned on a brand launch. We had planned on all of these beautiful activities. I guess the other lesson we have to sometimes relearn all the time is don't get too precious about your plans.
Yeah, don't get too precious is such a great word. And yes, the internal committee, and we've had a number of conversations on this show about successful rebranding, and not one of them was able not to include the CEO and sometimes a member of the board and others, because if you don't bring the executive team along, it just feels like a coat of paint. And that's the last thing that you want to do is just, change a color here and call it a day. So that's great. And yes, not getting too, being able to be agile. This is a really good moment for agility. So I have really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's tremendously relevant to any brand and what the challenges that you're facing right now in terms of, is it time to rebrand? If you haven't started one, this may be a difficult time, but you may need to. And in fact, I mean, one of the things that I think CMOs need to be thinking about now is we may not be able to fill the pipeline the way we did before for the next 2 months or 3 months, because your customers are thinking about survival or other things. Yes. And if that's the case, maybe you can spend a little time. Maybe you could have committee meetings internally about the brand and your purpose and your values, and have conversations that you didn't have as soon as your CFO gets his contingency plans done. Assuming those are done, then there may be some interesting conversations that you can have about that. And sort of number two is, if you have a brand purpose, I would say now is absolutely the time to make sure you're being true to it. Because if you're not, it's not real. And then I guess 3 is yeah, this is a good time to be agile, really agile. Well, Julia, thank you so much for being on the show and taking the time, and certainly wish the best of luck. I'm wondering is if the listeners wanted to help the American Lung Association one way or another, what would be the easiest way for them to do that?
Go to our website, lung.org. And there's plenty of donate buttons all over the place, or you can go to lung.org/COVID-19.
There you go. All right. Well, and anyway, for your listeners, thanks for staying with us. Always really appreciate the time. I know your time is precious, and we're trying to make these shows of value. You know how to get a hold of me, by the way, and suggest other topics. 917-679-8852. Text me. I'm waiting for your input. I've been getting some interesting texts lately. And lastly, until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.